Welcome to everyone. Thank you for coming tonight to launch this special year-long programme of events and activities to celebrate 100 years of women in transport. My name is Jo Valentine and I'm Chief Executive of London First, whose mission is to make London the best city in the world in which to do business. We feel strongly that London's continued success is critically dependent on efficient and reliable travel to and from and within the capital. And as the ever more efficient and reliable gender, it is crucial that we continue to show that transport is an industry choice for women as well as men as we face the challenges of building a system that can support a population growing at an unprecedented rate. Rather ironic and very poignant that we mark the launch of this initiative on Remembrance Day, given that it was the First World War that gave women the first real opportunities to work in transport. In 1914, 100,000 women entered the industry to take on the responsibilities previously held by men who had enlisted. That was a 550% increase on pre-war numbers. They took over roles as drivers and conductors on buses, trams, and underground trains. They also helped to keep the fledgling Royal Air Force in the sky by acting as mechanics. And by 1918, there was even an auxiliary organisation, the Women's Royal Air Force. In a moment, one of the current female players in the transport industry, Michelle Dix, MD of Planning at TfL, will show us a short video that covers the history of women in transport in further detail, and give a few words on why greater diversity is needed in the transport workforce. Then Mark Kahn, Chief Executive of Network Rail, will set out some of the programme of activity that will be delivered over the coming year. This will be followed by a Q&A session, so please have your questions ready. And all that remains for me to do is to thank our sponsors this evening, Novacroft and Thales. So, over to Michelle.
Well, just very quickly to say, we're introducing the first film. It's about the history of women from the first 100 years, so watch it and enjoy.
A woman in a man's job. I don't know, what do I think of that phrase? What do you say to that?
100 years ago, there was such a thing as a man's job because less than 10% of married women worked. But the events that set the war machine in motion also made a huge difference to women's lives in the UK.
The First World War was a really interesting time for women in the transport sector. Prior to this, women had been involved in relatively low status, low paid jobs. And then when the First World War starts, more and more men are called up for service, and there's a shortage in staff in the public transport sector around the country. So women eventually are called up to take on some of the roles that men had to leave behind. These women found it incredibly empowering to be employed in this sector. They got a free uniform, they were given quite a lot of authority, and I think that made them feel quite important. They were really contributing to the war effort.
At the end of the war, men came home looking for their jobs back. The women who had served as bus conductors and station staff were handed a thank you note and sent home.
Between the two wars, women continued to work in the transport sector, but reverting to those traditional roles, so in catering or working in offices or as ladies' room attendants.
With the outbreak of the Second World War, it was clear that women would be needed in great numbers to keep the country moving.
The recruitment of women happened more quickly, and they took on a much wider range of roles.
Women's work kept many cogs of the wartime transport machine turning. One of the crucial tasks on the Underground was fire prevention.
If all this dust, paper and fluff was allowed to pile up, You'd only need one spark, and woof.
The crews of cleaners called themselves fluffies.
They go down on all fours to sweep and scrape up tons of fluff and dust that we have left behind in our travels. It coats the insulators of the conductor road. Charlie, walking along there, is the foreman. A sweet job for a fella who likes a little bit of fluff.
As in the First World War, women were often used as unskilled labour and paid less than men. We do not even have written evidence of some of the most impressive feats achieved by a mostly female workforce. Their contribution has been passed down by word of mouth.
Waterloo Bridge, as you know, is a vital transport link, and apparently it had been built by women during the Second World War. This story has been kept alive by the river boatmen who referred to the bridge as the Ladies' Bridge. We have quite a lot of oral history of people witnessing women working on the bridge.
At the end of the Second World War, men started to come back. And again, it was expected that women would give up their roles that they'd assumed during the war for the returning soldiers. But actually quite a few stayed on, and we see a shift in the attitude, and women took on greater roles from there onwards in the transport sector.
In 1965, Barbara Castle made history as the first female Minister of Transport. Unlike buses, it would be 4 decades before the next one came along.
Transport Minister Barbara Castle visited the Railway Technical Centre and toured the workshops. Half of British Railway's new carriages are manufactured here. A welder's eye view now. Not easy without deranging the hairdo.
Barbara Castle's biggest achievement was getting the Equal Pay Act passed in 1970, followed by the Sex Discrimination Act 5 years later. And with this, there was no holding back women. They began taking the helm in transport and in politics.
The 80s was a time of big hair, fashion. Margaret Thatcher was still in power. It was a time of wanting to work in London and feel the excitement of the 1980s.
At the tender age of 19, Anita Patrick was the first woman to set foot in Earls Court Depot, where 400 men worked.
My first day I actually turned up, and I remember walking along this long corridor, and all these shutters came up, and there were actually men looking through the shutters as me and another lady were walking through, and I think, what have I let myself in for? London Underground was a very different culture, a different place to what we know now. Having women walking into their depot, for them, maybe have been a bit frightening.
Joan Saunders Rees was one of the pioneering women who became train operators in the 1980s.
I felt so proud being a train driver. There was me at the head of a train, taking a train from A to B with 1,000 customers and making sure they got to their destination safely.
That was a really lovely film, and I've certainly recognised one of the ladies who was on that film in the audience. Do you want to put your hand up? Because I saw you earlier. So, a real person. Anyway, looking around this room, there are a lot of women in transport. Maybe not enough, but certainly a lot of women in transport. And I believe there's representatives from 50 organisations. And that really speaks volumes for the interest in this particular activity, this programme that we've sought to establish. We're celebrating 100 years of women in transport. Let's hope there's about 1,000 years of women in transport, and the proportion of women in senior positions is far greater than it is today. The programme isn't just a sort of a nice event this evening to celebrate what's happened in the past 100 years. It's also to reflect on diversity in our workforce and the challenges that still remain. It's also about attracting more women into a wide range of roles that transport has to offer, not just engineering roles, but sort of marketing roles, digital roles, legal roles, financial roles, all sorts of roles that are necessary to keep London moving, because every journey matters. Is that right, Vernon? Have I done the plugs? We also need to make sure that we actually engage, motivate and inspire female staff to want to remain in the organisation and, importantly, to attract more into the organisation. So this isn't just a sort of programme for tonight, it's an ongoing programme. We want to develop it, we want to embed it in business as usual to make transport a really attractive career for people to want to join, women to want to join. As Jo says, and as the film's illustrated, there's been a century of women in transport. And in the First World War, there were 1,700 women employed on the underground, the bus and tram networks. And the public encountered them on a daily basis. So it's like a rare and sort of like a interesting position. But unfortunately, at the end of the war, they were forced to return home, which I thought was really quite sad, particularly if they were forced back to the kitchen sink. However, in 1919, amazingly, due to some trailblazing women, the Women's Engineering Society was founded in 1919. Dawn, I believe, is from the Women's Engineering Society. Dawn, are you here? Oh. Well, hopefully Dawn will arrive sometime, but actually they're still going 95 years on to actually actively support women engineers, particularly into education and employment. And due to their trailblazing efforts and the legislative changes that have taken place over the years, then many more people, many more women are working in transport. We've also got some generations of women within TfL whose family were some of those first pioneering women. Lorraine Fairclough-Earls, who's a system planning and development manager, her grandma, Rose Townsend, worked as a bus conductor for 26 years. Is Lorraine here? Maybe she was one of the 300 who weren't allowed in because we had an oversupply of people wanting to come. Natalie Edwards, who's a program manager, her grandma was a clippy on one of the trams, and Leslie Powell, who's a commercial manager, her great-great-grandma worked as a bus conductor during the First World War. So there's a history within the organisation of people whose mums and grandmas have been part of the predecessors to TfL. Within Transport for London today, we employ 27,000 people to ensure every journey matters, all 25 million of them that take place every day. Women make up 22% of the workforce and 22% of the senior managers. That's all right, but it's not good enough since 50% of the population are women. What's worse, though, is that half of the workforce is employed in operations, and the representation of women there is only 15.8%, so we've got a lot more work to do. And we have a single equality scheme for TfL. We now have a KPI. It's a key performance indicator. You might not be excited about it, but I'm excited about it. Yeah! Which relates to achieving everything we put in the single equality scheme, so everybody has a role to play in doing that. And we've got a load of programmes within there that we have to deliver on, building schemes such as Inspire Engineering and Classroom to Boardroom to attract young people to consider careers in transport, strategies that we have in place to increase the diverse pool of applicants into key roles, and certainly over the next 3 years increasing the number of women, BME and disabled candidates who get accepted on our apprenticeships and our graduate schemes. Say, look what a fantastic time it actually is to be a woman in engineering today. There's so many projects that are on the boil, the biggest of which is Crossrail. Crossrail are here because I can see half the team. But a big proportion of the team, a third of the Crossrail team, are actually women. Now that is an amazing achievement. That's in comparison just to 20% across the whole of the UK construction industry. 19% of the graduates working on the project and 25% of the senior management team are women. Again, good statistics. And in addition to training 3,500 people in underground construction skills, the new training facility of the Tunnelling and Underground Construction Academy will also be a long-term provider of skills for many other construction jobs, including Crossrail 2, which we have started on already, because we don't waste time, us women, we just get on with this stuff. We've got some strong networks to support women across the industry. We've got the Women's Transportation Seminar, who I know are represented here because I've seen Camilla, and it provides a professional network for women in the industry. And we ourselves have successful staff networks across TfL, including a women's staff network group. And I know the other organisations here, Network Rail, DFT, Crossrail, also have such groups. What we want to do today is join you all together, so it's an even bigger, stronger network. And we do want to strengthen our network for the future because there's so much more to do. There's so many more projects to deliver. HS1, HS2, HS3, HS4, whatever you want, we can deliver. And we want to improve our customer-facing sides, all those like softer skills, because as Joe said, we are growing rapidly. We will be 10 million by 2030, we'll be 11.5 million by 2050, because we're having more babies, we're living longer, and we are staying in London. So we have to have the transport infrastructure that will provide for that. So there's jobs required to get the money, because yes, you can build stuff, but you need the money, so we need some people with some money skills and some property development skills and financing skills just to enable us to deliver that. So today we want to rebrand our industry so many more women will see it as exciting as we do and will want to join us. You can hear about those women now because there's another short film about the women of today, and then after that Mark Kahn, who is a man, he was allowed in here, we'll talk about demonstrating the business case for more women in transport. I'd just say it's obvious, isn't it? Thank you.
When I finished school, I knew I wanted to be an engineer.
I always knew I wanted to work on the water.
I was only in for like about a 3-month contract. But yeah, obviously that's changed and I've been here for nearly 12 years.
I was at that stage of life where I wanted a career. I didn't just want to go from job to job, I wanted a career.
One of the things I love about the industry is seeing stuff come out of the ground that you've had an impact on.
I love transport, I love thinking about it, I love the numbers behind it and understanding what's going on.
Running a station is like running an empire. You have, budgets and finances and people and stakeholders and operations.
I enjoy everything about the job, being out on the river, actually driving the boats, the people I work with, customers I get to interact with.
I like talking to people. You get to meet everybody from all over the world.
The thing that interests me the most about designing for transport is that so many people get to use it.
I am in the position where I can make a difference to people's lives, and I can see the difference that I make to people's lives, and that's what I find really exciting.
It's great to see so many women having made positive careers in transport. However, we're nowhere near where we should be.
You just have to be vocal. And you have to stand up for yourself, and you have to be able to conduct yourself in a way that demands the authority that you're going to need, because ultimately you have to earn it, and you have to earn it more so when you're the only woman.
I think what is expected of a woman, those expectations necessarily haven't changed. So it's still like, yes, go and do these amazing jobs and climb the ladder, but make sure you're at home to put your kids to bed. So it is really difficult.
Personally, I don't think I'd bring anything different than a man could bring. I think we would do exactly the same job and perform at exactly the same level. But I think it helps to have as many different types of people, male, female, and different ethnicities in the workplace as possible.
Our customers are expecting more and more from us, and to be honest, in order to provide that and be a really high-performing organisation, we really have to have a kind of demographic that reflects our city and our country.
It's been great to see my team become 50-50 men and women coming and joining the analytical team to support important decisions.
You are empowered, your opinion is valued, you're treated just like everyone else. It's something where you feel like you are making a difference.
Going forward in the future, the more women coming through is benefiting the industry, making it more dynamic.
There is so much evidence to support the fact that the most successful organisations are organisations where people from all backgrounds work together, men and women working side by side.
My job is all about looking forward and designing a better transport system for the future, and that's truly exciting.
There is such a huge programme ahead of us in terms of transport delivery, HS2, Crossrail 2, the new Silvertown Tunnel. So all of that requires both genders to help to deliver that.
I hope that this celebration acts as a call to arms to everyone working in transport to encourage more women to join our fantastic industry.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You know, the last few days have been pretty emotional, actually. I've been very proud to represent railway people at remembrance events. And I must say, I'm very proud to be here at this landmark event tonight. You know, the stories of women in the railway 100 years ago are extraordinary, unimaginable, really. It was a time not only of the most appalling war, the first modern war, but also a time of profound social change. It's worth remembering that women didn't get the right to vote until 1918. Today, the world is unrecognizably different. But I'd like to think that the pioneer women of 1914 would look proudly at some of the roles that women in transport have today. Michelle, who spoke before me, a senior leader in Transport for London. Claire Moriarty, who's here, is Director General of the Rail Executive. Anna Walker, Chair of the Rail Regulator. We have 3 board members who are women on Network Rail. And we've had senior women leading train operating companies, HS1, HS2, and operating routes in Network Rail. This is a really positive story. However, the fact that we could still think of these women as trailblazers 100 years on, I think shows how far we still have to travel. The harsh reality is, as you saw in that video, that in transport we haven't made as much progress as other industries. Our workforce mix is not reflective of the society we serve, in gender or in ethnicity. Today, only 23% of transport jobs are held by women, about half the percentage of women in the total workforce. Surely it must be right that the employee mix of an industry that serves society should reflect the balance of the society as a whole. Now, all businesses today have to compete for the very best talent. The transport sector has tremendous challenges and opportunities. My God, it's a thrilling time to be in this industry. But to meet those challenges, we have to access the best talent. A truly diverse and inclusive organizational culture is one where people are able to bring 100% of themselves to work every day. They don't have to act. They don't have to conform, to play lip service to stereotypical norms of behavior. They can be themselves. And this applies to women, to men, to people of different ethnic backgrounds, religion, or sexual orientation. I just don't believe that these labels should prevent people from progressing or contributing to the businesses of today. But that's just part of the story, because this is not just about accessing the best talent. I know that balanced, gender-diverse teams perform better. All individuals perform better in such teams. When women started becoming much more visible, on a visible presence on the oil and gas platforms that I grew up with in the 1970s and 1980s, when they became a more visible presence 20 years ago, the difference was profound. The extremely macho, unsavory, and frankly unsafe culture that was the hallmark of the industry in the 1970s and 80s changed dramatically and forever. Now, our gender imbalance in the railway industry is a huge opportunity, I believe. If we can resolve this issue, we can access a rich vein of talented people who will not only bring their skills to this industry, but they will help our existing staff to perform better too. So I believe we need to make a step change. Now, the companies represented here today want to move to a position where we are lagging behind to one where we are driving ahead. And there are a number of areas of focus that we need to achieve this. First, we must develop our existing workforce. This is about engaging, motivating, and inspiring our current female workforce, providing them with the opportunities for personal development at all levels. Secondly, we must engage and inspire the next generation so that women choose a career in transport. In Network Rail, we recently signed up to our own 10-step Women in Science and Engineering initiative, WISE, as have some of the other organisations represented in this room. The aim here is to get more women into science and engineering careers. I see this as an imperative for the future success of our businesses. The more gender-balanced workforce leads to a more open, honest, inclusive, and collaborative approach, and a safer working environment. We really believe that we can build a better future, just as our forebears did 100 years ago. 100 years ago, women changed society forever. But as we know, there is so much more to do. So let me close with the last verse of John McCrae's poem, In Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from failing hands we throw. The torch be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Great to have Mark as a champion for diversity. One needs leadership from the top. But my job now, anyway, is to introduce the panel. So, Mike Brown, you're up first. Managing Director of London Underground and London Rail. Claire Moriarty. Director General, Rail Executive, DfT. Andrew Westenholm, Chief Executive of Crossrail. And last but not least, Val Shawcross, Member of the Assembly. The first question for the panel is, what has been the single biggest development that has encouraged women to enter the industry? And I'm going to start with Mike.
I think it's opening up job roles that people didn't envisage could be open before. And I think, I was talking to a third-year apprentice the other day, a woman apprentice at our new fantastic apprentice facility down at Acton, and she said to me, Mike, no more conversation about pathways, about groundbreaking roles. This is just how it is now. Don't put people off. Don't put women off by saying this is groundbreaking. This is not becoming the norm. You've got to start talking about it like the norm. I felt seriously told off, and it was a really surprise.
Claire.
If you look at what makes people enter the industry as opposed to what helps them to progress through, I think you have to go back to what's happening to people in schools. One of the most fascinating pieces of information that somebody from BIS told me is that whether or not girls take GCSE physics is an incredibly important indicator of how wide the careers they can go on to in the future. So although it sounds quite a long way from actual transport, making sure that girls are given the right opportunities to study science at school, I think, is a really big contributor.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I've been very lucky in my career. I've had 3 women who've been my bosses. They've all been absolutely at the top of their careers. They have shown huge leadership, huge skill sets, and they've been role models. And I think one of the breakthroughs is to allow some of the wonderful programs that we have, that we invest in, to showcase off the great examples there are in women engineering. And later I hope I get the chance to demonstrate how proud we are on Crossrail of having many of those leaders at a very high level within the industry. So there's a lot of great work going on already. There are a lot of great people at the top of their profession, and I'm very pleased to say increasingly more of those are women.
first is to say I think there's an issue of critical mass. You know, I think when we've got 22% women, it actually does become a more normal environment and people feel safe and they've got support from each other. And I think actually that's been a great takeoff platform and I hope we can move forward from there. But I think the second thing to say is that, you know, when we're women now who have some choices in our lives, and actually when you're making those career choices, you want to go to an organisation where you will be treated decently and where you're going to have a decent experience and you're not going to have to fight sniggering and exclusion and be bullied and harassed. And I think the really important thing is having a good organisation that trains all its managers right the way down the line, and that you have middle managers and junior managers who really take on board you know, the equality culture and the decent culture of the organisation, because that's where the change really happens. You know, it happens out of the sight of the senior managers and the chief executives. It happens in your daily life. And women tell each other these things, don't they? You know, if you know somebody who's had a bad experience working in an organisation, it gets round. And I think the story now for Transport for London in particular is getting better and better. We've got a responsibility, I think, to encourage women into the industry and to support women when we get there.
Thank you to the panel. Right, now, have you got your questions ready?
Being a feminist and the art of faking it, I think one of the things, you know, we need to do for our girls, we talk about which subjects they choose, but so much that determines girls and women's futures is about confidence. It is often that the girls are perfectly capable, but they actually don't have the confidence to do it. And I do think we need to have those social dialogues with girls in schools that says, actually, you might not feel confident. You may have been trained not to be confident, but you need to learn to fake it. And one of the things you need to do is try and take some risk and take some subjects that you might not think that you can do, but actually you can. And this is messages all the way down the line. You know, one of the things I'd say to the senior managers and to the educationalists, when you're looking at young women who need encouragement through the system, it's actually about women not actually having to fight for their credibility when they walk into the room, when they sit at the board, on the boardroom, or when they walk into a classroom, to actually have some assumption of your ability. And actually, I think that these are messages that, it's good to see some blokes here tonight, I have to say, it is some messages that men throughout the system need to give to women. Actually, we know you can do it, so there isn't an issue. And certainly, science education, it's really important that girls get more confident.
Andrew.
Yeah, sure, thank you. I mean, these are all really important issues. And I'm particularly passionate about how you get more young females into engineering. But let me just, if I may, pick up on the diversity issue. I once a month go and invite myself to one of my 44 job sites, and I meet a dozen people. Cross-section from, could be a tunneler, could be a tradesperson or tradeswoman, right up to the senior management. And what is really interesting over a period of time is to understand the richness of the conversation you have by those rooms full of diverse people, rather than those rooms full perhaps of rather more stereotypical people that represent the industry of construction. And you know, this question of safety, the first thing I always talk about is the values that people hold, the way in which people talk about safety, and little evidence is required other than just listening to the conversation that you have. And when I go down to those job sites with a mix of male and female, a mix of backgrounds, a mix of skill sets, a mix of where they were born and what country they come from, you undoubtedly get a much richer conversation. There is a strong business case that says that with a diverse organisation, you absolutely benefit. And on Crossrail, what we're doing, it in a sense is a little sad that we have to, but we are now training a diversity course across the whole of Crossrail. By March of next year, 1,000 people will be able to go through that course, just to understand and just to reflect on the barriers that we put up and the mindsets that we sort of carry, and to try and loosen up the constraints that we set up, and to encourage much, much more of a diverse organisation. And would you be surprised if the answers you get around health and safety don't represent a much broader view? And would you be surprised that probably the output of that local team in terms of health and safety is more likely to be better than those that don't?
Personally, I think the way to get more girls doing science is you make it easy, you create an expectation, and you don't patronise them. I have 2 teenage daughters. They go to a good local comprehensive, and the school just assumes that everybody's going to study science. And actually, it makes it quite easy. You don't have to make a choice. I'm absolutely certain that given a choice, my older daughter would probably not have chosen to study physics, but she's studying physics and she quite enjoys it. So some of it is taking the barriers away, but absolutely not making it kind of pink. There is actually some research I read recently that said the pinkification, I think they called it, of science, this attempt there was to turn science into make it about lipstick, make it about clothes, that just doesn't work. You've got to treat people with a lot of respect, and just a bit, as Val would say, you just have to help people to realise that they are as entitled to be in these spaces as anyone else is. I think the other part of that is what we keep coming back to. There's getting people into an industry, there's keeping them, and there's making sure that they are the leaders of the industry. And actually, you have to keep those 3 things in balance. So, we do need to put lots of effort on making sure that we make transport an attractive place to come and work, and remind people that it has such a huge range of different opportunities of every single different type. Some people are engineers, many people do operational jobs. You have finance and legal people. You can work in any part of transport, so there's a huge range of jobs. So getting people in, making it interesting, making it accessible. We have to keep people. There is a moment for many women when actually, family considerations come into play. Being able to work more flexibly, to have more options, to feel that it's acceptable to have a family life. I think the conversations I have suggest that not all women working in transport feel that those are acceptable things. And then finally we do, as Andrew said, we have to offer people role models. So many times I walk into a room and I will be the only woman, or there might be one other woman, or possibly 2. But at a senior level, I've worked in different sectors, that's never happened to me before. We have a lot of women who are just not quite being the women in the most senior positions, and we have to find the ways that help those women to be very visible role models, so we have more women leaders, as well as helping people at different stages of their career.
And do you have anything to say about encouraging women in rural locations into a transport world, which is the question there?
Well, I think the most important thing is that we encourage women in rural areas will still have an experience of transport. I mean, it's impossible for anybody not to have an experience of transport, whether it's walking, cycling, whether it's driving a car. Different women in rural locations may have less experience of public transport. To be honest, I'm not sure that matters terribly much. I think what we need to do, from an economic point of view, we need to make sure that women have an opportunity to access employment opportunities. So if rurality is an obstacle to that, that's something that we need to look at ways of addressing. People's experience is quite different, whether they're in a rural area or a semi-rural or an urban area. But I think one of the things that makes transport so fascinating and so universal is that it touches everyone wherever they are. It just may touch people in different ways.
Just a couple of quick things. Vauxhall Station modernisation that we're doing at the moment, 45% of the workforce in partnership with Bechtel are women. It is the most fantastic project. I mean, basic things like pre-work fitness and stretching exercises. The men all laughed. I have to be honest, the men, stupid as they are, laughed at this.
And I have to tell you, now this has become a daily ritual because it gets people geared up for the type of construction activity they're going to do during the day. No man would have been intelligent enough to think of that. So thank you for that. That is fantastic. The other thing I was just going to say is I do think on the education side, Joe, if I may, I think the education system, notwithstanding Claire's daughter, lets women down hugely. I sat in this room, this very room, just over a year ago with business leaders and a group of 13 to 15-year-old kids, and the girls around the table, the young women we were talking to, were almost to an individual being talked out of doing science and keeping science subjects going. I think our education system has so much more to do, but we in industry have to pull the education system along with us, because guess what? It's not just morally the right thing to do. We are missing some really significant talent that is in our society that we need, given the scale of investment and the scale of construction and the scale of customer service delivery we have ahead of us.
Very good. Right, we've got time for a few more questions.
"25 years ago, almost to the day, I started first of all in London Underground, and at that time we had a grade of staff, member of staff called leading railman brackets woman, and it kind of said it all. And Penny is absolutely right. I think the whole issue about because picking up Mark's point about an oil rig, I have to tell you, Mark, a train operator, a train driver's depot is not that different from an oil rig. When you get a critical mass of women in a group of train drivers, the whole atmosphere changes. Guess what? They come to work more often. Guess what? They look smarter. Guess what? They pick up their trains on time. Guess what? They do all the sort of things that in the old world they wouldn't have done. So I think, certainly attracting more women. I'm absolutely correct. The colleagues here who were talking about the opportunities for women in all fields of transport. I think we do need to open our minds to everything. The sort of customer service skills, the direct engagement with the public. The way, I have to say, that many women are just more competent managers, more rounded managers in dealing with situational leadership, dealing with issues with people who've got problems and managerial issues that people have to deal with in the workplace. I've got some fantastic senior women manager who are in this room tonight. I have to say, if you look at the stats, look at the numbers, safety records are at the top of the league. There's some men who do pretty well as well, but safety records are at the top of the league, attendance levels are top of the league, and customer satisfaction is at the top of the league for those managers who are leading as women in our organisation. So we've got to do more, and we've got to show we give people the opportunity. The burning platform, by the way, is already there. The burning platform is the growth of usage of public transport. That's why we need all the best talent we can get into this industry.
I think culture, you made the point about culture, it's absolutely critical. It's really interesting you talk about the uniform. I spent many years working in the health sector. Health sector has the uniform, it has the antisocial hours, it has all sorts of things, but nursing is a very predominantly female profession. So many of the things that look like the barriers aren't actually the barriers. I do think that culture is a big, big issue. Because even though we're starting to break some of it down, there are still expectations about what's a reasonable way to behave, and I think particularly younger people coming in who are used to a world in which women are equal find some of that quite off-putting. So I think, but culture is changed by everybody doing little things differently all the time. I think that links to the point about about credibility. The most important thing we can all do, men and women, is just keep talking about it. I make a point of constantly saying, good gracious me, I'm the only woman in this room. Because if you don't draw attention to it, then people kind of don't notice it. It becomes normalised. You have to keep calling it. You have to keep saying, and if I need to leave early in order to do something at my children's school, I do say quite theatrically. So And people, I've talked to people working in the transport industry, women at quite senior levels, who say, when I do that, I feel embarrassed. I'm not allowed to talk about it. I don't feel comfortable. It's really important that everybody does it, that they're really open about it. You talk about it a lot. That's how we build. That's how you establish credibility, and that's also how the culture starts to change, because it's all about showing what is reasonable and what isn't. And just to follow up, mentoring. I was a mentor for Women in Rail last year. I will be a mentor in Women in Rail again next year. It is one of the most powerful things you do. So whatever your scheme you're in, they probably have a mentoring element. Please, please do it.
This entry point into the world of construction and infrastructure and engineering. I remember almost this time last year, it was Fiona Woolf, who's then the new Lord Mayor of London, helped us through a diversity conference, 250 people in the room talking about some of the barriers to entry. And halfway through I said, all of these people had roles on Crossrail. How many people have got a maths A-level? And about 30% put their hand up. How many people have got a maths and physics A-level? And probably less than 20% put up. I guess my point here is that there are so many more jobs in this exciting sector than there are that require you to take a difficult choice as a young girl at the age of 13 to carry on maths and physics, a choice that isn't made obvious to you when you're 15, very little guidance, very little perception that, there's just as good career in engineering as there is in finance or accounting or something else that people more obviously move into. So there's a misnomer around maths and physics being needed to be top of your game in engineering. And we have to make the industry more exciting. It isn't about dirt and dust and physicality. It's actually about leadership, building teams, all those sorts of skill sets. About this sort of do we need another war to create this sort of no. But if you just heard some of the statistics, London is growing at this phenomenal pace. The industry that I represent is growing at a huge pace. Unless we can attract a materially significant more number of females into our industry, we will stop. If you forward play that, so much damage is going to be done to the society that we know, to the industries that need to grow unconstrained, unless we can attract more people into this industry, more young people. We have a fantastic program on Crossrail called Young Crossrails, more than 100 schools, more than 10,000 people we're touching. People into the industry is one problem. Getting more diverse sections of our industry is another, and getting more females in. If we don't do this, then there's a very serious consequence. That, I think, is the burning platform, and we need tonight to start to realise we have a huge distance still to go. We've made a good start. We've got some good role models. We've got some great, exciting programmes, but there's a long way still to go. Let's start tonight.
I think I'm going to answer a sort of blend of those questions, so I may have recreated the question. Do we have tools to help us tackle this? Somebody mentioned mentoring. Rather than overburdened women managers, let's admit the fact that it's really important for men to mentor women. And one of the reasons why it's really important is that there is sometimes, it happens more in my world perhaps than in yours, but there is an element of networking and social contact and social awareness in promotion issues. So it really matters that men managers are fully willing to engage in workplace relationships, and I mean that in the professional sense, with women, because it is sometimes about knowing those tricks of the trade. It's about knowing who makes what decision within the organisation and about being steered towards the right. So let's actually mobilise our senior men to actually help the next generation. Apprenticeships, I think, are a fantastic tool. We've used them here in City Hall because we've recognised actually City Hall slipped backwards in terms of racial diversity, but there is some fantastic young people coming out of university, and we've given some apprenticeships, and they've come on and they've had a great experience. So there are tools that we can use. At the end of the day, I think two things. One is you get up in the morning and you do it. You appoint a woman. In my previous life, I'm on about my 9th life now, but in one of my previous lives, I was the Labour Party Women's Officer, and I did all the work to design the all-women shortlist. And everybody went, "Oh, it's not. This isn't fair. It's not." Actually, the point is, there's a load of really good women out there who can do these jobs, and sometimes you just have to take a decision. I'm going to appoint some women to this job. There might be some legal issues about that, but actually when you're in an interview and you're interviewing, you can decide, if this woman's going to do the job, I'm going to give it to her. So remember that. The other thing is, you know, where is the fire? What is the driver? If what really matters in this business is that our passengers and our customers get the best possible experience, and that our society functions as well as it should, and our economy functions as well as it should, let's admit that we ought to be closer to that passenger experience. And so many of our passengers are women, they're older people, so many, and there's so many things that go wrong with the transport industry, are often about not being close enough to our passengers and what they need. And I won't blame TfL for this, because I think TfL is not bad really at customer service. But I'll have a go at the train operating industry. And I'll say, you know, my take after 6 years of doing the politics around transport is the thing that the rail industry gets really, really wrong is they do not know how to communicate. They do not know how to talk to and transact information with passengers. Now, you know, if we had a much better balanced workforce at every level, don't we think our rail industry would actually know how to give real-time information and customer advice? And at the moment they can't. They think they're running trains around, and actually they're moving people.
Okay, so this is just a foretaste of the programme that lies ahead for 100 Years of Women in Transport, which is operating over the next 12 months, I think. There are going to be a series of insight sessions with influential speakers, and I'm just going to give you some dates for those ones coming up. So on the 26th of November, there's Susie Beanie, who is Lieutenant Colonel Commanding Officer with the Royal Logistic Corps British Army. And then on the 15th of December, there is Tanny Gray-Thompson, who's on the Transport for London board, Beverly Bell, Senior Traffic Commissioner, and Michelle Dix will be speaking to you again. And then the other thing I have to say to you is there's 2 large comment boards over there. If you've got anything to say about anything at all, just write it up there. If you'd like to offer sponsorship or to help with different elements of the programme, talking in schools, mentoring, insight sessions, there are 2 people standing over here who are about to put their hands up, Kerry Rogan or Jasmine Kerry. So anybody called Kerry is probably the right person to be speaking to. And then we have programme champions. So from each of the supporting organisations, that's Transport for London, DFT, Network Rail, Crossrail, Women's Engineering Society and Women's Transport Seminar, there is going to be a dedicated LinkedIn group which is called 100 Years of Women in Transport. And there are going to be monthly email updates. And that is all from me, other than to say thank you to Nevercroft and Thales for sponsoring this evening. Thank you again to the panel, and please talk amongst yourselves. Thank you.
Tonight's event's been fantastic because it starts to bring into the whole conversation of diversity. How do we get the best people into the transport industry?
It is very diverse and you can make a career out of it. The industry is so big.
Until you get into it, you don't know how many opportunities there are and what sorts of roles there are, and there's lots of room for growth.
You could be a planner, like myself, you could be an architect, you could be a sociologist. There's so many aspects of it.
I actually feel like you're progressively delivering something that's important to London.
The face of this city is going to change because of transport, and I get really excited about what things might look like in 2020 or 2030.